Welcome to Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. My name is Amber Ireland, and I'm here with my co-host, Jill Bucaro. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Guided by Third Wheel. Today, we were going to talk a little bit about Bridgerton again. Probably not the whole thing, but I was telling Amber, so I finished Bridgerton yesterday, the second half, and I was just, not my favorite Bridgerton season, not my favorite Bridgerton relationship. And I was telling Amber, I was like, man, the relationship just felt a little toxic to me. And we started to unpack that a little bit, right? Why was I just kind of getting the ick from them? And I think there were a couple things, and I'll just rapid fire name them, and then we can kind of talk about some of the themes that Amber and I were pulling out. But I didn't like how, and these are all spoilers, so if you haven't finished Bridgerton and you don't want to, and you want to watch it, pause this now. But I didn't like how Colin wanted her to stop doing her passion, right? Mm-hmm. He's what a fun, weird little activity you had. Now just stop it, right? Mm-hmm. That will solve everything. Right. Now you can stop doing that and you can focus on being my wife and all will be perfect. I didn't like how when he was mad at her, he froze her out. I don't know if that's my own trauma and my own triggers, but that really pissed me off.
Nobody should do that. But
I don't think anybody should. It felt like poor communication to me. And I didn't again, just we have all of these problems, right? We have Colin freezing her out, him not wanting her to pursue her passions, her honestly straight up lying to him at times, right? Her being kind of a shitty friend. Everybody's just unwilling to make a decision, unwilling to make a move. We're just kind of sitting in our own misery. But of course, then Hollywood creates a crisis, right? That somehow magically resolves all of this. Right. And I'm well, that crisis would never happen in real life, right? There would never be a weird ball and a speech and a queen and all of this stuff. And it's I see two people who are unwilling to work through their own shit, but thanks to the powers of the universe, right, creating this situation, all of a sudden everything is tied up in a bow in 2 episodes. And I was just I'm not really in love with their behavior in this show and their communication. So then Amber and I kind of started talking about, I think we throw around the idea of toxic relationships, right? Oh my gosh, me and my ex were so toxic, or my coworkers at work, our relationship has become so toxic, that friendship is toxic. And we started thinking about what creates a toxic relationship, right? What ways are we showing up that makes it toxic? How do we get out of that toxicity? So I think that's kind of what we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start with that?
I think with toxic relationships, nobody starts off a relationship in what they think is a toxic way, right? Sure. You never start off and you're I'm going to get in this toxic relationship.
This feels fucking crazy.
Yeah,
right?
I love this, right?
Let me just make it worse.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, a lot of relationships that we have been in do start off as toxic. We just don't recognize it. And I think what happens is one or both people start to become more emotionally mature. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the relationship and you're oh, ew.
Right.
Right? And then now it's, oh my gosh, this relationship was so toxic. Well, it was, and you played a part in it.
I mean, you were actively participating in it for quite a while.
Right. And now it feels bad because A, you can see it, and B, you're showing up in a different way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, something to kind of think about when you're oh, these relationships were so toxic in my life. Well, you played a role in that. Sure. That was not just the other person. And how have you grown to a place? Because if you can see it now, you've grown.
Yep.
Right? How have you grown to a place to not start another relationship that is in that same vein? What have you learned in order to set solid foundations for your relationships in the future? And I think a lot of that has to do, we talked about foundations for relationships, right? If I have a core wound and I feel a lot of shame or guilt, or I don't feel like I'm good enough, I'm always, when I go into a relationship with somebody else, I see myself in that way. So I'm always trying to overcome it. Yes. So as I'm trying to overcome, I'm overreaching. Yes. I'm doing things outside of what authentically I should be doing because in my mind, And it has nothing to do with the other person. In my mind, I'm not good enough. So I have to do all of this extra in order to be in relation with you. Yes. And if that's the case, then now our bond is built out of my shame and guilt from my side, right? I'm bonded to you through that, opposed to I've done the work and I know that I am good enough and that I don't feel like I am unlovable or somehow less than other people. Now I can connect with somebody more authentically, more in a way of like love and compassion, opposed to out of like fear and guilt and shame.
Right, absolutely. And I think having been someone who has often shown up in relationships and just shown up in the world, right, as, you know, kind of riddled with shame, never feeling like I'm good enough and always trying, and I think it often takes on like this performative kind of piece. Like you're always kind of performing, right? Yeah. Because you're like, well, the real me, if I were to just show up and just like say exactly what I'm thinking, you know, do exactly what I want to do, ask for exactly what I want, ain't nobody gonna want to fuck with that, right? Nobody wants that. So then you like literally like put on a mask and step into a performance. Asking for the things you think that this person will want you to ask for, right? Doing the things that you think this person will want you to do. And exactly to your piece, now you have a relationship built on lies, it's not authentic, it's not true. And we've talked about this in other podcasts. At some point, the rubber is going to meet the road on both sides with both people where they're going to say like, this is a fucking house of cards, right? This connection isn't really connection, because even if you are a damn good performer, which man, am I a good performer, I am phenomenal, they're going to figure it out. That that's not really you, that you're hiding something. And even if they can't put their finger on it, right, they're going to be like, something about this just isn't real. Right.
Well, and I think, you know, tying it back to Bridgerton, looking at, you've got someone who is writing all of this stuff. I'm not making shit up. It's factual. You know, I'm putting it out there. Maybe it's hurtful to other people, but this is how I'm seeing things, right? I'm putting it out there. And that's one life. And then my other life, I want to be with those people, right? And so how does that end up playing out? Because now I've split myself. And eventually, like you said, the house of cards is going to fall. Right? Because had I just been authentic in the first place and said, like, yeah, these crazy things are happening.
My name is Penelope Featherington, and I'm going to write a column about it, right? These are my thoughts and feelings and perceptions. And I think sometimes that ties back into that shame piece that you're talking about, right? When we low-key hate ourselves or don't think we're good enough, we never want people to see the real us, right? So how are we existing in these spaces like with ourselves or with one or two close friends or with one or two trusted people? It's almost like we do have these double lives, right? Like we take some time to be over here and be our true selves, kind of like Penelope in the writing, right? As Lady Whistledown. But then we like show up in the world with this mask on, right? And we're like, it's like this double-edged sword, or almost this reinforcing kind of circle, because we show up with our mask on and we're like, well, God damn it, why doesn't anybody see me and love me? You know, and it's kind of this self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling fear and prophecy that you're engaging in.
And you're not integrating all parts of yourself into your daily life. And we talk about that a lot in our self-care workshop too, is like, you need to bring you into every area of your life. You can't just show up at work as one thing and show up at home as another thing and show up with your friends as another thing. Yeah, there are different roles that you have to play, but it should all be similar to who you are. You shouldn't have to leave a core part of yourself off to the side in order to interact in your life.
Yes, exactly. And I think many of us, and maybe that would be like one hallmark, right, of a quote unquote toxic relationship, is it feels like there is a part of us that doesn't belong or can't belong or can't be a part of it. And sometimes that's because of you, right? Because you're not showing up as your whole person. You're so hyper focused on pleasing the other person that you're, you know, not neglecting to please yourself. But I also think we have to be thoughtful about the people that we choose to engage in friendship and partnership with, right? Because if we can see from the jump, oh, this person doesn't like this, or you know what I mean, or they're not interested in this, or clearly we do not align on X, Y, and Z, right? Then instead of that being a clue of being like, oh, let me twist myself into a pretzel, let me find the appropriate mask. Instead, it's like, okay, well, maybe this just isn't for me, right? Or maybe this is a relationship that's going to have to be really surface level, you know, that we can find a way to engage and work together or get along because we have a lot of mutual friends. But like, this isn't going to be a person for me.
Right.
And I think that's where we as individuals have to like start off on the right foot, right? If we're seeing those, and I don't even want to call them red flags, but just like if we're seeing those glimpses of things like, okay, this is not going to work, then our response needs to be like, let me set the boundary and keep it moving, not let me abandon myself, twist myself to make it work.
Right. You know, I've been in relationships with people who do think very differently than I do about different topics, different, you know, political views, whatever. And sometimes it's not a deal breaker for me because it's like, okay, well, I can do my thing and you can do your thing. And I can honor the fact that your thing is different than my thing. And we don't have to, like, fuss with each other that, like, I'm right or you're wrong.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so being able to live in that space opposed to, I have to be all in with whatever you want. And I have to abandon what I've been doing. So I think, too, like, when we look at those places where it's like, okay, we are different. Is that difference okay because we can both continue to do the things that we love to do? Or is that difference really like a line in the sand where it's like you can't be accepting of this or I can't be accepting of what you're doing? You know, and just being able to kind of tease that out as well so that we're on that level playing field where we both get what we need in the end.
It's reminding me a little bit of the conversation we had in the first Bridgerton episode where we talked about like the best relationships, whether they're romantic friendships, work, whatever, are two whole people, right? And only two whole people are going to be able to have the types of like conversations and like be able to kind of tease out those nuances like you were just talking about, right? If you are a person that is still looking for someone else to fulfill certain needs for you or to like try to bandage up old core wounds for you, you're never going to be able to have that kind of conversation where it's just like we agree to disagree, right? Like you're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm truly not going to have any feelings about that, right? We can pretend that you're going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I have a lot of feelings and insecurities about that, but I'm going to be like, no, man, I'm cool. Like, I'm a cool girl, right? Like, I don't care. But really you do, right? And not until you are a whole person and you've found ways to address those core wounds, meet your own needs, are you going to truly be able to be like, yeah, you know, we don't align on that, or you want to do this and I want to do that, and I am truly, truly okay. But I think, you know, I say a lot, like, you got to fake it till you make it. And that is one thing that you cannot fake till you make, because it will blow up eventually. Like, that is something where you truly have to show up as a whole person, or else those types of things are going to breed insecurity, which is going to manifest in overcompensation, like you were talking about, which will lead to the house of cards falling. So let's say you look around and you're like, man, this relationship like doesn't feel healthy. How do you start to get out of it? How do you start to make it healthy? How do you get yourself out of that cycle of like the push, pull, the overcompensating, the twisting into a pretzel, the lying about who you are, putting the masks on? How do you start to like deconstruct that?
I don't know, that's hard. Well, the first thing is it's not about the other person. I think a lot of times it's easier for us to, I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're manipulating another person. We are, you know, bending into a pretzel to fit into their world, right? And so when you're in relationship with other people, you can't really, and things aren't going well, you can't really look externally and be like, okay, what do I fix here, right? It's like, what do I fix with inside of myself? Why am I behaving in this way that I know is not good for me, right? And going back and looking at that and working to heal those things within yourself, because once you're doing that, now I'm starting to show up as myself, and I'm standing up for myself. I'm communicating what I want. I'm no longer like just going along with things that I don't really want to do. But if you don't have that like core sense within inside of yourself, you're never going to be able to stand up in that way. Like you don't have any foundation to stand up on, because again, you're reaching, you're overreaching, you're overcompensating in order to be in relation with other people. And really you need to make sure that your relationship with yourself is solid. And that's really hard work. And it takes a lot of you have to spend some time with yourself. Like nobody, maybe some people will, maybe if you do, some coaching or some therapy or something, somebody will clue you in like, hello, this might be something you want to consider. But likely those relationships that you're feeling like maybe aren't going well, they're not going to tell you like, hey, I think maybe you've got a core wound of shame that you need to, work on,
look at.
Right? So it does take a lot of that inner work yourself and setting yourself up with the confidence to say like, no, like I'm going to set a boundary here. But I think we talk about boundaries a lot and we know that they're hard to set, but it's really hard to hold a boundary if you don't have like some type of core anchor that says I'm holding this boundary because of this.
And because I think when you get the core anchor, which, and that's hard because it's like there is no set, like if you do X, Y, and Z, you will all of a sudden feel connected to yourself, feel grounded in who you are, have trust that the world is unfolding as it was meant to. Like you said, you just got to do the work. You have to start asking yourself the hard questions. But I do think that when you start to have that, even if that connection is like, feels very tenuous or, just continuing to like trust that, protect that, like protect that little you inside. And I think there's also the second ingredient is that you have to trust that what's meant to stay will stay and what's meant to go will go, right? I liken it a lot to like telling the truth.
Right.
So I used to be kind of a liar, kind of a manipulator. I think I've talked about this before. I was always very interested in the outcome, right? And trying to control the outcome and trying to like treat everyone like they're a puppet so we could all together get to the outcome that I thought was the best for all of us, And when your eye is on the outcome, you have to do some lying and manipulating, right? To get to, to herd the people where they need to go. And it's exhausting, right? Because you're always having to think like, what are they thinking? How do I accommodate this? Like if they move left, how do I get them to go right? Right. And you're just so hyper-focused on the outcome. And it's tiring. It's very tiring because it's like, oh, I had that mask with this person. I talk like this with that person, right? And finally, a couple of years ago, I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm done doing that. Like, I'm just going to tell the truth and, like, come what may, Right. Because really, to be perfectly honest, all of the lying and manipulation didn't get me what I wanted, right? So I'm like, well, if I'm not going to have what I want anyways, then, like, fuck it. I'm not going to work so hard. And so then you just start telling the truth, right? And then when you tell the truth, you give other people the space and the freedom to react how they want to react, right? You're like out with somebody and they're like, do you like this food? And you're like, no, I don't, right? And they can either be like, oh, she doesn't like it, or they can be like, man, she's like a real difficult nightmare bitch and I never want to see her again. Cool. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I put that ball in your court. And I liken that to like when you know who you are, you just do the things that like Jill wants to do. You express the needs that Jill actually have.
Right.
And let the people do what they want. But, I mean, that requires quite a bit of letting go.
Yeah.
And quite a bit of surrender. And understanding that, like, if your core wound is abandonment, which is one of mine, people might leave.
Yeah.
And that might happen.
Yeah.
And it probably will happen. Or, like, if your core wound is, I don't know, like, someone saying, like, I don't love you anymore, right? Or, like, I don't see you. Like, this you not interested. That might happen.
Right.
You have to be okay with that.
Here's the sad, hard truth of this. As you start to do this inner work and you do start to heal, right? And you do start to show up for yourself in different ways, that also is a little uncomfortable. Because you start doing it, it kind of feels good, but it's different than what you've experienced before. And so you feel off kilter because it's not what you would normally be doing. You're like, oh, did I do enough? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And again, if you don't have that core anchor, if you've not done the work and you know why you're doing what you're doing, it's going to throw you into a tailspin and right back in to what you were doing before. Because you don't have anything that anchors you and says, okay, this feels uncomfortable. Why does it feel uncomfortable? Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm not doing that anymore. Yeah. Change is uncomfortable. All right, I'm willing to sit in this. Right? If you don't have that thought process because you didn't do the work and you don't have the anchor, you're just going to go back and try to learn the lesson a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And not to say that you don't end up learning the lesson 1,000 times anyway, but it gets easier if you have started to develop those anchors within yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Like if you have that ability to kind of like drop down, right? Or like check in with you and say like, what do I need in this moment? What do I want in this moment? What am I feeling in this moment? I think you have to have that ability to check in, because the guiding is coming from within, right? Because if you so often have spent your life making decisions based on seeking others' validation, trying to manage other people's perceptions of you, then all of your guideposts are on the outside, right? Like you're always looking, looking around. How do I react? How do I respond? How is this person reacting and responding, right? But this is a shift inward. It's like, I don't need to pay attention to what all these motherfuckers are doing, right? Like I need to pay attention to what's going on inside of me. And that needs to inform my decisions, behaviors, communication. And that's hard. I mean, that's a total change of perception, right? It's like, I mean, and forever I spent my whole life looking out. How is everyone else reacting? What's happening? How are my people?
For safety.
And it's safety. It's a safety thing. But hopefully, you can find yourself in a safe space where you can, maybe you do a quick scan, right? And then you come inside and say like, okay, what do I really need?
Well, and you come inside and you say, I am safe. I'm safe. Yes. I'm safe here with myself. Yes. Like, no matter what is happening out here, I'm safe with myself. I know how to handle myself. If something out here does become dangerous, I know how to deal with it.
I trust that I will recognize that and do something about it.
Right. Instead of constantly scanning and never knowing that you actually have the ability to keep yourself safe. You know, we've talked a lot on this podcast about meditation and journaling and therapy and coaching and all the different things. But I truly think that everyone should have some type of a daily practice where you are sitting with yourself. And that can be hard. If you've never done that, that can be hard. You could potentially spend weeks of spending, 5 to 10 minutes by yourself and having emotional flooding because you've not done it. But if you never take the time to be by yourself, to be with yourself, and to really process through, what am I feeling right now? What happened today? How do I feel about that today? If you don't spend that time, you're never going to create those anchors.
Right.
You're not. And if you're holding on to somebody else's anchor that's in your life, just know that could be fleeting, because they might not stay.
Yours.
It's not yours, and they might not stay. And then your anchor's gone. And what are you going to do?
Right.
When you hear about people having these like awakenings, right? Or they're becoming more in touch with themselves, a lot of times it comes after a tragedy. And a lot of times that's because you lost your anchor.
You lost your anchor. You were making somebody else your anchor.
Something else
your anchor, and then you lost it because you're always going to lose it. Like the only thing that you're never going to lose is yourself.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Like there is no situation, I mean, maybe there's some grief there, right? Maybe we might engage in some bargaining, like, well, what if this or what? No, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The only thing you have is yourself.
Right.
So why would you make anything else your anchor?
And why would you try to hold, I also think about all the times that I've probably made something else my anchor. Yeah. And I'm like, how unfair is that? Especially when it was people. How unfair is that to that other person? Yes. That like you've created an anchor and I'm also holding on to it. I'm like, guess what? Guess what? I also want your anchor, right? And then you'll find, and that's why I think when you start doing the work, we've talked about this too, you start doing the work, you start kind of shining a little brighter, people start coming to you. Well, you have an anchor now. They're like, oh my God, an anchor.
Amazing. Can I
hold it?
I have certainly seen that where people are like, oh, great. Like, you've got a good thing going. Like, let me latch on. And it was good for me because it made me feel how I'm sure I made so many other people feel in my life.
Like, where they're like,
and the sun rises and sets on you. Without you, I am nothing.
Right.
Like, this relationship is the most important thing in my life by far. And I was like, what the actual fuck? But what good perception, because certainly I have shown up like that for other people, right? Where I'm like, fuck me, fuck my whole life, who cares about any of this, like all eyes on you. And then to have that happen the other way, I was like, holy shit, like, no,
and also like the perception of that, right? When I'm doing that to somebody else, I kind of, sometimes we do have some awareness that like I'm over here just like boosting you up. Right? Yeah. I'm doing like a little ego boost for you, right? And so that must feel so great to you. And then you start thinking about like, what do I want in my life? And you're like, I want people in my life that do what I do for other people, right? And then when you do the work and those people actually come, you're like, ew.
It's gross. It's like, too much.
I don't want that. Which also means that other person who did the work, they didn't want it either.
They didn't want it either. No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm like, oh God, like, no wonder this was so fucking off-putting, right? Like,
Right.
it's terrible. I do think the other thing we have to talk about with this is, you know, if the goal is to like have ourselves be our anchor, right? To have our guidance come from within, right? Or within / a higher power, however you have that figured out. And I want to show up in relationships as a whole person.
Right.
I think we have to talk about how when you begin to do that, like just, I don't want to say how boring, but kind of how boring that feels.
Yep.
When you're used to like the pretend filling each other's core wounds and getting codependent and riding high on the emotion. And it feels so different.
Right.
And I think we need to talk a little bit about reconciling some of that. So you would agree that when you show up as a whole person and you're interacting with another whole person, all of that, like, it's not emotionally charged, right? It's there's nothing to like get high off of.
Right. And you also create, what I found is then I create an emotional charge because of that, right? So like, okay, this was normal, but that's not how it's always been, right? This is like what it should be, but it's not what it's always been. So then I go into this place of, I go back into the shame and the guilt and the fear and like, did I do enough? Am I still enough? Because it's different, right? And because I have the anchor, I can see it for what it is, but I still am going to go back into that and like try to reconcile.
Like have that panic moment of like, why did this feel this way?
Right. Right. And then having to kind of get back to like, oh, it felt this way because it should be this way. This is what should be happening opposed to what was happening. But yeah, it feels kind of scratchy. And I want to also bring up too, because we talked about, you know, doing the work and then being in the relationship, right? And sometimes it works that way, right? Like you do the work, you find the relationship, and you're in the relationship. But that's a very different space than being by yourself and doing the work.
Yes, it is a different space.
And you have to be committed to continuing to do the work while you're in the relationship. It takes two people to be in relationship with one another. You got to do, you know, some relationship things there on a regular basis. But you better also have your own practice for yourself.
Yes.
And hopefully that other person is like, that's cool with me. Right? But you still need to have that alone time so that you can process things and make sure that you're right with yourself.
Well, because if you stop doing the practice when you get in relationship with someone, then you're still relying on someone else to heal a core wound, to fill a void in you.
Right.
Because if you're like, oh, I only have to do this when I'm alone because there's no one else to do it for me, then you haven't fucking done it.
Right.
But I think that's an easy thing to fall into because especially at the beginning of a relationship, there's like tons of external validation to feed off of, right? For those of us that feed off of it, it's like a fucking feast, right? You know, because you're texting and the hormones and, you know, and all of that. Right. Like you're talking, you're seeing each other, you're getting that hit all the time. And it would be very easy to forget. Right. Oh, I don't need to take care of myself, right? Because I'm just high on all the external validation. So, yeah, I think that's a good thing to note. I think the two big things is, like, you've done the work, right? You're looking to engage more authentically with people, whether it's in romantic relationships or friendships, or I'm trying to, like, not allow work. I think especially those of us like in the social work field, the work is so emotionally charged anyway. Our relationships with our coworkers can get really dicey really quickly. But let's say I'm trying to show up healthy and authentically. I think the first thing, like we talked about, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel different, and it's probably going to feel like not as exciting. Right. And like you don't get to get like as high about it. Right. And I think the second thing is that you have to, the work never stops, right? The journey never stops, because then all you're going to do is you're going to backslide, right? Like if you're not doing the work, things are probably like, to me, falling apart a little bit on the back end. You're going to have to do that again. Right.
Yeah, the work is ever going. But I do think in my own life, there are some things that I'm like, yeah, that probably, like it could pop up for me and I could, you know, like have some old feelings or stories pop up. But I'm far enough away from them now that like I can see it immediately and be like, okay, cool. I see you, but like, no, we're past that now, right? But, you know, especially if you're somebody who is just now realizing like, I have been in the same relationship now 5 times, right?
Yes.
And I don't want that anymore. What do I need to do? That first time that you try to step into a new relationship in a different way, all of those old stories, even when you've done the healing work, all those old stories are just going to pop up one right after the other. And be like, hello, would you like to play me out again? Like, how about me? Can I be the old story today? And hopefully you've done enough that you can see it and be like, nope, not going to do that this time. But, when you're just transitioning, it does feel...
For sure. And I've definitely been in places where, recently where I've had an old story pop up and I might go down the road a little bit, right? And I might start to play into that. And then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Yeah. This feels too familiar, right? Or now I've grown enough that this feels uncomfortable. And I do think it's possible that an old story pops up, you fall victim to it, right?
Oh, yeah,
you start doing some of that stuff and then you're like, wait, and that just requires being honest with yourself, being honest with the person that you're playing out that old story with, to be like, hey, I think something from my past triggered me, right? Like, I think I'm feeling X, Y, and Z because of, A, B, and C. Can we talk about this? Can we try to dial it back a little bit? Because they get you sometimes. Yeah. And sometimes, you're just you're like, I've been got. They got me, And I think recognizing that, we have to also honor that as growth, right? So
tying this back into Bridgerton, and I've not watched it. Full disclosure, not watched this season of Bridgerton at all. But it sounds, and what's her name?
Penelope.
So it sounds like Penelope did a lot of the work.
Penelope did a lot of work,
and and was kind of on a decent track. And then the boy came back, and she got wrapped back up into the old story.
Yes,
right?
She did.
And it sounds like she's not doing the work anymore, right? She's like, I will abandon all these things because here is what I wanted. Here's my validation. I no longer need to validate myself.
And there's some wrestling, right? But it was pretty evident that she's like, I would pick Colin over everything.
Right. Sometimes we do that, right? We have the old story, we do some of the learning, and then we go backward.
But I think the thing about Bridgerton is it ended where she got to have her cake and eat it too, right? She got to have her column. She got to we kind of saw these lives be integrated, right, in a way, and she got to have the boy, right, and have the baby and have all the things. But what I think, to me, the cautionary, the little red flag about all of that is you have to do that work yourself, right?
Right.
The queen isn't going to come, right? There's very rarely do the stars align and external forces create integration and happiness, right? Usually that work we have to do.
Right.
And I think that, to me, was the rub of the end of Bridgerton, is the stars aligned in such a way that things ended where they needed to end, but nobody had to do any hard work or have any fucking hard conversation.
Well, she doesn't have the anchor to that life.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
She's holding on to several different anchors to have the life that she has. She was willing to give up the writing. She was willing to give up these other things that were definitely part of who she was and what she enjoyed. And they were given back to her, which is, it's nice. And sometimes
we get a gift.
Yeah, sometimes we get a gift from the universe. But here's the deal. If you haven't done the work in order to be anchored into that, into receiving that, if it's just all these external things,
it's not really yours.
It's not yours.
Okay. So to me, that is the asterisk, right? At the end is all's well that ends well, kind of, right? But is the foundation for all of this really here? And maybe that's what, here in the real world, we have to build that foundation ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to. You can hold on to other people's foundations. Just know that it's going to...
They'll leave.
They'll leave. They'll, things will change. Maybe their foundation changes and you don't have that anchor to hold on to anymore.
I guess, yeah, maybe not that they will leave, but that foundation will not last for you if it's not yours.
Right.
You pull a card?
Yeah. Let's do a Soul's Journey one.
Oh, I love a Soul's Journey. The OG cards.
I know.
First cards I ever had.
Oh, this was your first deck ever?
The first deck I ever had was the Soul's Journey. It's a nice one. It's a good starter one.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a deep breath together. And release. And we will set the intention that you will receive exactly what you need from this card pull and this podcast episode today. Hopefully there is, some nuggets of wisdom here that you have heard about relationships that have you thinking a little bit about how you would like to be showing up in your relationships. We'll use this one. And we pulled the loneliness card. And actually, I pulled this card last week sometime. But with the loneliness card, it says on here, I know that I am never alone. And I think that really speaks to relationships, right? And, when we aren't in relation with other people, like we're single, maybe we don't have like a large friend group, we're transitioning in age, or we've moved or something like that, right? And understanding that you're never really alone. And the reason that you're never really alone, I mean, like, we can talk about all kinds of spiritual reasons why you're never really alone. But what we need to be creating is that core anchor, because that is how you're not alone.
Right.
Because you have yourself. You always have yourself. And I would say if you have yourself, there is always available energy for you to connect with.
Yes.
Outside of yourself. But if you're constantly, like, oh, I'm so sad that like I don't have a partner, or I'm not married yet, or I'm not this, or I don't have, 12 friends, or nobody's going to go out with me this weekend. I think this really speaks to what do you need to do internally to not feel alone?
Right. What holes are you looking for other people to fill for you, and then fill them for yourself?
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, we'll catch you next time.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. We would be honored if you would like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.